Well, good evening. And there's your first surprise as you tune in to Straight Talk tonight. I am clearly not Bob McCoskrie. We will not theorize here in open or in public of why I'm clearly not Bob McCoskrie. We could spend the entire evening. But look, Bob sends his apology. He's had a little bit of an injury to do actually with his eyesight, which is most unfortunate. So we're actually sending Bob as you tune in because I know you will be watching as best you can. Maybe you're listening in, but we're sending our best to Bob, and I'm sure all viewers and listeners are. So I'm Simon O'Connor. I am hosting tonight. This is going to be quite the ride. So let me call in our wonderful panelists tonight who are joining me as we touch some of the big issues. And so I don't know why I'm going to start at the bottom left, according to me. So that's the wonderful Alfred Naro. Welcome back to the country, I believe, Alfred.
Yeah, kia ora, kia rana. Good to be back.
Well, that was short and simple. You're not going to give us a hint of where you were?
Yes, so I was on the beautiful island of Vanuatu, or one of the islands of Vanuatu, there for 5 days. Just an amazing time meeting people there. Obviously recovering from the earthquake in December of last year, which has been devastating, especially for their local businesses. But beautiful people, a real hunger for just things to change. Had an opportunity to meet with the president, the prime minister, and other ministers that were there, just to speak with them and talk with them, share with them, and in some cases pray for them as well. So it was a real honor.
I'll just add from my side, my memory of Vanuatu is the green carver, but that's a discussion for another night. And someone who is far more esteemed and not into bad habits like Carver, Bruce Logan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Simon. Good to be here.
Now, you've been holding the home fires here in New Zealand, so you're keeping well, I'm sure.
I had an excursion on Friday. I went to the dentist and got a tooth out, and I've got a bridge in the front of my mouth, which is making me feel funny.
Would I be right to think, though, that the most painful part of it all was actually paying the bill at the end?
I anticipate we get the most painful part is the wallet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And heading down to the wonderful south, we have Rodney Hyde. Rodney, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you on.
It's so wonderful to be here. And, I think you do a good job filling in for Bob already. You've got my vote.
I've got very good. My problem a few year or so ago, I didn't have quite enough of the votes, but we're here, fortunately, with Family First and Straight Talk. And I said, we're sending our best to you, Bob, and you can critique us all at the end. But look, our first topic today is actually to do with Family First's petition around what is a woman. And I think there's a somewhat irony, which I'm going to front foot right from the start, that just by circumstance, we have 4 men on tonight. Our wonderful women panelists weren't able to make it. I couldn't even rope my wife in. But we all know that back in, was it August 2024, we actually presented to Parliament around what is a woman. And viewers will know we actually had an ad we tried to put in the paper asking that very, if you will not, simple question: what is a woman? And it seems to have perplexed people ever since then. And as we say, Family First has put a petition together. Over 23,500 people signed that petition. You'll see that some wonderful women in the middle. We know who they are. And then Bob and myself, just to I don't know, balance things out somewhat, presented this petition to the Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, and to Tanya Unkovich, who is also a New Zealand First MP. They accepted the petition. It went off to the petitions committee to say, look, New Zealand's law has to recognise the difference between males and females for the safety, particularly of women, in their bathrooms, in their sports spaces, and so forth. So September 2024, we spoke to the petitions committee. In November of that year, 2024, bear in mind, people, we heard back to say, it's still being considered. And here we are today, and this is where I want the panel to come in. We still have not had an answer from the government. The minister primarily responsible is the Minister for Women, Nicola Grigg. She's a relatively new minister, but she's the Minister for Women. But I don't know, maybe we'll start with you, Rodney, because I know you've opined into this space quite often. Is there a somewhat irony that the Minister for Women is months later from a petition being handed in, still unable to reply?
Yes, because the Ministry of Women can't define what a woman is. So we have a ministry that doesn't actually have a defined purpose, because anyone can identify as a woman. I have a mixed view of this because it's this issue that brought me to faith. So it's been a wonderful experience for me as I've explored this. And for us oldies, we regard it as a joke, right? Because we know what a man is, we know what a woman is. But what's behind this is a demonic attack on our children. And our children are having their identities and their sense of self destroyed in our schools, and it's deliberate. And what it is doing to children, you tend to think that it's doing it just to the children that end up on the puberty blockers, which is horrific, of course. But it's actually doing it to every child. I've seen it in my own children at primary school because they come home and they say, Dad, they're saying I could be a boy. Can you imagine a worse thing going on in a kid's head? And so they're destroying these young girls and young boys' entire sense of who they are, their entire sense of binary sex difference, of marriage, of family, and it's deliberate. And if you think it's bad out in the world of politics, in the world of government departments, that's minor compared to the schools. My daughter, when she was 12, sat the test to go into high school. The teacher explained that if you identify as a girl, tick the girl box. Not if you're a girl. If you identify as a girl, tick the girl box. If you identify as a boy, tick the boy box. And if you are gender unsure, I can't remember, you tick the something else box, right? I said to my daughter, that's insane. And she said, of course it is. I said, what did the other kids think of it? She said, they thought nothing of it because they know of nothing else.
This is one of the big challenges, isn't it? We're raising a generation that what is the most simple question for millennia can't now be answered. So throwing it to you, Alfred, and putting on your former politician's hat. In fact, Bruce, you've been outdone tonight, 3 former politicians and your esteemed self. But turning to you, Alfred, well, why is it taking so long? Is this just a normal process situation, or is there something else going on here, in your opinion?
Well, it's just too hard. And it's more than just being inconvenient. They don't want to talk about these issues because they know they want to play the middle ground. They want to be careful that they don't offend too many people. When I was in Vanuatu, I was talking to the Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I was talking about Israel as a nation. And anyway, one of the things that came up is a diplomatic policy where they say that we want to be an enemy of none and a friend to all. And I said, well, with all due respect, we are in a season and in a time where lines in the sand have already been drawn. So you have to make a choice, and you have to make the right choice. And that's similar to where we have now here. This is what we have. And I was just reading in preparation a report that was written by Jan Rivers and Jill Abigail in 2021. And they wrote a report about the fact is that despite legislation proposing self-identification being deferred in 2019 by the government of the day, the Labour Greens government of the day, they reported that numerous government departments had already changed their policy settings around self-identification. So that's telling us that part of the reasons why, the politicians can be the head of government, trying to make these decisions. But Simon and Rodney, you both know the bureaucracy is the body of government. And often they say that, politicians will come and go, but the bureaucracy will remain. Well, can I say to you, the bureaucracy is already embedded with this ideology. And they aren't going to shift it anytime soon, no matter who says what, no matter what press release comes along. And I agree with Rodney. It's not about good and bad anymore. It's about good and evil. And when you use the word evil, you have to sort of define that a bit more to people, how they understand that. Well, it's the intent for harm and to do wrong, masked in a way of trying to be tolerant, considerate, and understanding. But the reality is the outcome over and over again. You can just take the Tavistock Centre, and we all know about that. We're about the puberty blockers and the changes And the trauma that it has created over and over again is the outcome for so-called tolerance and acceptance for all things. The reality is that the lines are drawn. People, and especially those in the political field, need to now make a decision. It's biological, it's historical. Get over this thing around sort of allowing that. And I finish off with the words that Os Guinness said, and you were there at the ARC conference, Simon, with One-Eyed Bob. And when you were there, Os Guinness made this comment. He said, it's time for us to say that humanism has failed us as a civilization. All the humanistic views and tolerances and so forth. We now need to get back to values, to views that are historical, that are scientific, that have been that standard the true test of time, and the family is the cornerstone of our communities in our society.
I was a great fan of what Oz said, but won't distract us there. Bruce, I haven't forgotten you. I'm just going to play a short video clip, then I'm going to throw the humdinger of a question to you to finish off this little section.
Here is one of the most difficult questions you can ask in our culture today. Are you ready? Thinking caps on, dictionaries and encyclopedias at the ready. Here's the question. What is a woman? A woman always has been, always will be our beloved mothers, grandmothers, wives, daughters, sisters, aunts, adult human female.
So first and foremost, that's a reminder to all the wonderful women and men watching. If you've got comments tonight, jump onto the Facebook page of Family First or our YouTube channel, any of the channels that's streaming, and fire in your comments. I'll make sure to be looking at those as the night goes on. But Bruce, for the millennia, as I said at the start, we could easily define that question. So first of all, what is the answer? What is a woman? And why is it now so difficult for people to define what generations before have?
Well, I think underlining our question of what is a woman, there's an even more fundamental question, and that is, what does it mean to be human? And we have always believed, more or less in Western culture, that human beings have been created. And out of that creation came the idea, whether people understood it or believed it entirely or not, that our dignity rested in the fact that God had made us in his image, male and female. And that gave us a foundation on which to think about what it meant to be human. Now we are in the middle of a battle that is telling us that that being human is a matter of performativity. To use a word by that feminist inside player, Judith Butler, who talks about your sex is determined by how you live out your life. Not who you are, but how you live out your life. And that's where she uses this dreadful, ugly word, performativity, so that we can make ourselves, we can record ourselves, because we have bought into the game that the wokerati play, or the liberals, or whoever you want to call them, by the kind of language they use. One of their tricks is to try and change the language and the way we think about ourselves, and so to invent new words, or else to change the understanding we have of words. Like, for example, the word gender is introduced to mean sex. But and so it confuses us, in fact, once we buy into the use of that language, thinking becomes more muddled. We even invent words like cisgender, as though it actually describes anything real. And that muddies the water when we come to decisions. And the government is befuddled because it doesn't really know which side of the wall to fall on. And the idea that we used to believe in, that the human female is an embodied spirit, now there's an idea, and the human male is an embodied spirit, is not even contemplated. We don't even understand the significance of what that means. And when Rodney was talking about us, when he was talking, his very moving story, that story of Rodney's I always find it moving, about his family and so on, that identity is the issue. They wanted the mind-setters would have us believe that our identity is something that we invent. And that's brought about because we've bought into all those kinds of things that we call cultural relativism, or whatever we want to call it. And the concentration on female identity and what is a woman over male identity today, I think, is because women have a great deal more to lose. A morally mature civilization, I would suggest, always protects the identity of women. A moral civilization has to do that for a whole lot of good reasons that we've been talking about before, about the role of family and so on. So there's just so much. I think the government is finding trouble because there's just so much hanging on this. It's a big deal.
Well, it says me, I find it a paradoxical big deal. You've all, to me, rightly described the dynamics in play, which seem to make the government hesitant. I mean, our encouragement tonight to politicos watching is find some courage and, you know, join the millennia past and define this easily, because there's much bigger issues at play. And speaking of bigger issues, because we're not going to avoid this, we're going to talk next about the Green Party, the gift, if you will, that keeps on giving, but getting more disturbingly so. And obviously, in the light of recent hours, there's even more story now around Benjamin Doyle. But we're also very aware of someone called Tamitha Paul. Going to share a short video in a moment, because actually it was Family First in the Straight Talk panel that broke this news last week. Family First was actually at the forefront of bringing to the public's awareness what Tamitha Paul, a Green MP, was doing, and mainstream media took days to follow it up. So we're just going to roll this first of two videos of Tamitha Paul.
Christchurch, where I'm visiting Christchurch Men's Prison, and then doing an event at University of Canterbury with Peace Action Ōtautahi to talk about the police and what alternatives we could have to the police and what radical kind of police abolition could look like in real terms.
Yeah, so one of the big complaints I heard last year especially was around beat patrols just picking up homeless people's stuff and putting it in the bin. When I inquired about it, they said that that was because it was a Wellington City Council bylaw, and I don't think that that should be what they're dedicating their resource towards. I think that the police should be responding to incidences of domestic violence, sexual violence, things that only they can do. I think beat patrols is an easy thing that can be substituted for by Māori wardens, by hapai ake kind of community people walking around, which we have in Wellington, and I think they should focus on their core business.
Do you believe we should defund the police?
Altogether? I think there are some functions that the police are currently carrying out that other people would be better suited at. Mental health support and responding to people in significant distress is a big example. Our prisons are overcrowded, and there are too many people in there that are serving short sentences for very minor things. I spoke to a woman last week in one of the 3 prisons that I visited last week, and she was in there for shoplifting $12 worth of items. Now that's $151,000 worth of taxpayer money going into locking someone up who couldn't afford to feed themselves. That's not justice. That's unfair. It's cracking down on people who have got no other means to survive. The heavier visual presence of police does not make people feel safer. It makes people feel more on edge because there are more police around.
Panelists, this is just the tip of a crazy iceberg. Obviously, we've got Golriz Garaman, everything that's happened there. We all know what's happened around Darlene Tana, Elizabeth Kerry, a name obviously of recent past. Julianne Gent is still in Parliament, but loves to storm across the parliamentary floor and shirt front ministers. Obviously, Marama Davison, was it last year or the year before, believing it's only cis white males, there we go, Bruce, cis white males that cause violence in the world. Chloe Srawback, well, where do you even start? Kahurangi Carter, she had this little gem to share with us.
Ask yourself, would you rather be walking down a dark alley and see a patched member or a police officer? For many people in New Zealand, they would feel safer alone with a patched member than the police. And we need to ask ourselves why.
So someone who happy to see gang members. And then, of course, on top of all of that, we have some serious allegations, and I do want to stress that. It's allegations against the Green MP, Benjamin Doyle. And we had this little humdinger today come from Chloe Srawback and Marama Davison trying to defend him.
So the posts in question are from prior to them being a member of Parliament, and again, the account was a private account.
Were the posts appropriate, regardless of whether they're interviewed or not? Using that terminology, were the commission told, is it appropriate?
You are, I think, trying to put this in quite an oversimplified frame. Again, the language that we're talking about, the posts of somebody from the rainbow community putting a picture out with their child on a private account, I think it is entirely appropriate that again, what we're talking about here is a member of the queer community using language that is absurd and irreverent and oftentimes used within the queer community. Context is critical. Sorry? I accept that there are words that are used in different ways by different people. What I'm telling you is that a member of the queer community. Sorry, if I may.
Say that the queer community accepts in general or vulgar, explicit language.
I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that minority communities oftentimes end up using language or co-opting language which can be considered to be slurs or otherwise by external groups in ways that are absurd and irreverent, and I believe that there is a level of social responsibility that we as members of Parliament and you all as members of the news media have with regard to not oversimplify this story. Sorry, Jason?
When did you start following the account?
I wouldn't be able to tell you, Jason.
Was it when he was a member of Parliament? I'm sure you...
Benjamin's pronouns are they, them.
Sorry,
yeah.
My mistake. When did you start following the account?
Look, we really didn't want this to get into the public sphere. I think that there is absolutely no benefit to all of us spending our time right now discussing conspiracy theories, but the reality is that it is resulting in real world harm and danger towards a member of Parliament, to their child and to the broader rainbow community. So what we'd like to see from the Prime Minister is some leadership and to shut this down and to stop it right now.
What is the definition? What is the definition of the word pussy? What is the definition?
Honestly, I'm just not really that interested in getting into oversimplified definitions of terms like that. And what I can say to you, Mikey, is that what we're talking about here is terminology where context is incredibly important. There are many members... the context is that members of the rainbow community oftentimes use terminology which could be considered to be outrageous or otherwise externally.
Please let her finish the question. Thank you.
So,
extraordinary. I mean, where do we even start with what we've just heard there? Although I might suggest, panelists, that's the first time I think Chloe's been honest. She says we didn't want this to get out in public. But when we go through, as we have, the array of issues with the Green Party, the number of people, and now the seriousness, what is going on? Go as wide or as narrow as you want. I mean, Alfred, let's start with you. What is going on with the Greens?
Yeah, well, what's going on is that it's not the Green Party that, Rodney would have known, and we knew, with Jeanette Fitzsimons and Roger Donaldson, who both came from the Labour Party and then formed the Green Party, and their focus was always about the environment. That was their primary focus. That's not the case now. They've just so much lost their way. It's about, on impoverishment. It's about the Palestinians. It's about Māori. And most recently, it's all about them, right? They're focused on themselves. And to turn around and excuse the fact that this was something that was historical, well, let's not forget that when Sam Uffindale, when he was a teenager, and the media literally came after him, and they put, and Simon, because you were in there when it was happening, right? And there are many stories of many MPs that we know of that have suffered. Why? Because of the fact that the media and others have looked into their past. I think it's incredibly sickening. I think what's happening at the moment, I hope that some of the Green members and normal people who just decided to give their party vote to the Greens will start to consider just really how absurd, how evil, how lost this Green Party is. It is no longer the Green Party that people once thought was there, and I think they need to be held to account. So I say any review that needs to happen, Brendan Doyle needs to go. And I just can't remember his name, Rodney, the tennis ball. You remember? You'll know that.
David Benson Pope.
Yeah, Benson Pope. And remember? And he had to resign, right? Why? Because of something that happened in the past and so forth. Well, surely, the bar is is now, at such a low level where media and others are considering it, that he should be excused. If this was with any other political party, if it was with the National Party, ACT, New Zealand First, the media would have a field day. You'd have Chloe and you'd have Marama basically climbing into them. But now they've got their sanctimonious way of saying we should excuse this. It's all about interpretation, about the rainbow community. Abuse does not have a gender, right, or an ethnicity tag. Any forms of child abuse in any form, right, should be held to the highest account because they are the most vulnerable in our communities. And I believe that he should be sent out of Parliament.
So, Bruce, what's your take? I mean, look, it's such a broad question. So we obviously got these very disturbing allegations and the response that we played at large from the Green Party leadership. But we have a young MP like Tamitha saying, let's defund the police. She's effectively, not even effectively, that's not gilded, she's lying about who's in prison. We have others saying that I'd much prefer to be around patch gang members. I mean, how is it in your mind that they even get vote and support, including from media?
Well, they've brought into a situation that's operating, I think, I'm old enough to have seen the shift in the way politicians and society works. We used to believe that politics was about, to a very large extent, helping human desire conform to reality. That reality was out there and we had to come to grips with it as human beings and arrange things so we could do that. And our leaders, and we call them leaders these days, tried to do that. Well, we might call them the elite today or whatever. We would like give them a name. They have a nice little title. But now that's been shifted. And we do the reverse. We want to shift reality so it conforms to our desires. And that's the ideology that the Greens have bought into. They think that their ideology can change reality. They think that somehow or other that the way they think the world should be is the way it must be. And it is their aim to change it. And in that sense, they are simply just revised Marxists, regurgitated Marxists that who think that they can bring about the kind of world they want to do, where we have the underlying moral code operating as the battle between the oppressed and the oppressor, and they understand who the oppressed are, and so they go in batting for them, and whoever they happen to be, they bat for them irrespective of what they do. And as well as that, out of that, violence is actually acceptable. Violence is acceptable as a kind of technique to use as you bring about the kind of utopian world that you think you're going to bring about because of the way you think the world should be. And
we'll actually be picking up on that soon, Bruce, in the next segment. But just a quick heads up to our viewers. I am seeing all your comments. I've got my little iPad and that here. I'm not able to put them on screen. I just want to assure you I am seeing all the comments. I'm also seeing that Bob McCroskey is trying to start a hashtag Bring Back Bob campaign. Don't fall for it. Last but certainly not least on this is a massive issue, Rodney. It just goes so deep. I know in your work, advocacy, radio work, you've talked into a lot of this. I mean, what is your take, be it on this whole Benjamin Doyle situation, Chloe's pathetic defence, there's my judgment, or the Greens in general? Give us your take.
I tried not to believe it when I first saw it on X on Friday, and because it's so dark. But let's be clear just what the posts are. He posted on an Instagram called Bible Belt. I don't know how you say the word bussy, pussy with a B. And it turns out that means the word boy and pussy combined, which is disgusting. And he did it with pictures of a toddler. I understand his own. And he used the phrase "bussy galore" with this little kid sitting on his knee, and little kids with penis emojis all over them, like him on the photos. So these are disgusting images for anyone, and they need an explanation. Came out on Friday that these existed. The media were deathly silent until Winston Peters picked up on it. And then we see the Greens playbook. Victim. Oh, he's being attacked. Oh, he's under threat. No explanation of these. Oh, no, they're just using words in a playful way. Well, no one's playful about paedophilia. He's got to front up to Parliament and make a personal explanation of these photos, these images, or he has to resign. There's no way around it. How have the Greens got themselves into this predicament? Well, Bruce Logan is the best on all of this. But once you go down the wokerati route, there's no bottom to it. Because there's always someone who plays the bigger victim than you ever can. And so you get left out in the cold. It's not enough just to be gay, you've got to be queer. It's not enough just to be queer, you've got to be a married queer. It's not enough that you're a married queer, you've got to be a disabled married queer. And this is what Benjamin Doyle is. My understanding is he's married with a child. However, he wears funny clothes and says he's queer. He discovered, I understand, that he had a great-grandparent that was partly Maori. So he's a married queer. And he suffers some chronic disease, so he's a disabled married queer. Now, in the Green pantheon, that's pretty near the top of the tree, isn't it? And so he sails into Parliament. Clearly someone who's labelling themselves by their self-identification, and that's all that matters to them. And when they get called out about it, they've got to go away and hide. These people aren't actually well. They're not well. And I'm sorry for him, but I'm very worried about any kids that he's around, unless he can give a good explanation to the police. And I'm very worried that the Greens still have him as their, wait for it, early childhood education spokesperson. So the Greens, I think they're toast, because I can't see anyone voting for this bunch of wowsers over time. They're just going to start losing support.
It is just extraordinary, the breadth now of failures. And look, says me, and I'll talk about this more on Solid Ground tomorrow, you know, no political party is perfect. I said it before, the National Party, when I was there in those last years, as with Alfred, was having a bad run, but nothing to this level, depth or breadth. And again, I think, I'm sorry I've forgotten who mentioned it. It might have been you, Alfred, at the start. The media have come after just about every other MP for transgressions, current or past, unrelentingly. But on this one, as you've all pointed out, there's near silence. And in fact, almost a collusion, I might suggest today, guys, with the media. They all, at almost the same time, came out with the same arguments, which was pretty much the denials that the Green Party was running on something, as you pointed out, Rodney, is exceptionally serious. More on that tomorrow. We could spend all night. But maybe what comes into this is our next topic, because actually there's something called the Acumen Alderman Trust Barometer. And that's a test to see, to use Rodney's earlier word of whether we're wowsers or not at 8:30 at night. The Acumen Alderman Trust Barometer. And it is coming out, and I'll explain what it is. But it says 67% of New Zealanders, so that's 67% of New Zealanders are expressing a moderate to a very high sense of grievance. That's higher than the global average. And basically it says New Zealanders are frustrated, annoyed, and untrusting of government, of media, of its institutions. This is clearly of a concern. And this survey has been done for 25 years across the globe, tens of thousands of people, including 1,000 plus New Zealanders. So this is big. It's legitimate. And it's also showing, and I'm just going to get Gordon to throw up the trust barometer around, particularly the media, because I think we're touching on that. And I'll just run through these quickly and then get your guys' take. But long and short, trust in media is declining significantly in New Zealand. It's lower. It is much, much lower. This is image 10. It's much, much lower than New Zealanders' trust in business, in government, and NGOs. They trust the media less than they trust the media itself. Corporate businesses remain more trusted than the government and NGOs. And look, I come from the centre right, but I find that extraordinary. There's an image about what leadership, people's perception of leadership. Basically, people are concerned. It doesn't matter if it's a government leader that's on the left, the business, or media. You can see the graphs going up. People have less trust and think we're actually being lied to. And actually, there's good reasons for that. And the one that we were saying at the start, 67% of New Zealanders hold grievances. This is higher than the global average. And the next one, I think, guys, and it'll throw the questions to you, 24% of New Zealanders, 24% believe hostile activism is perfectly appropriate. So attacking people online, spreading disinformation, threatening or committing violence, the panel talked about that earlier, damaging public or private property. Almost a quarter of our population says that's perfectly fine. And then look, finally, guys, because there's so much data here. Bob loves data. He loves data. The last one I want to throw towards you is around the United Nations. This is image 17 for Gordon, who's doing all the hard work behind me here. New Zealand's not in it, but what we're seeing here is global organizations are just not trusted. Only 10 of the 28 countries measured trust the global institution, which doesn't surprise me, by the way. And the final one, trust in all news sources, is just declining over and over again. It's a theme that we've come to many, many times, guys, here on Straight Talk. And I'm going to start again with you, Rodney, because I know we've raced through this stuff, but trust is plummeting. And if I could draw your guys' attention, I'll put it to all of you because I think it's the key question in my mind. So I'm going off script. If a quarter of your population believes effectively violence and hostility is a good idea, and 67% of your population is in grievance mode, how does a country survive? There we go, Rodney. Easy question.
Not easily and not well. It is a huge problem and it's accelerating. So what's happened? Well, let's deal with the media. Of course, they've been hollowed out by competition. And they're pale imitations of what they once were. But they've also totally surrendered any sense of journalism. And they have lied to us. They have lied to us repeatedly, over and over and over. Why? Because no journalist now believes there's such a thing as truth. It's as Bruce says, they have that reality to them is optional. And people just make their own reality and they choose a nice, easy reality, which is a leftist view of the world and that's utopian. And so the men and women in the street can see the lies. Of course, COVID accelerated it because the lies there was so self-evident. You go across to government, and there was a time when you might disagree with the government. It might be a government that you didn't vote for, but you regarded the people that were in our parliament and in our government as people who were there as servants, doing it for public service. And while you might disagree with them, you didn't doubt they were doing it with the best of intentions. Now, overwhelmingly, I think we can see that our politicians seem to be extremely self-serving, and the decisions that they make are for the benefit of the government, not us. Over and over and over. The very issues that they talk about in government aren't issues that concern us. They're issues that concern them. And so I can see the grievance and I can see the loss of trust because we're being lied to. When it comes to the violence, that's understandable too. And again, Bruce understands this far better than me. He's made a lifetime study of it. But we've produced a generation that don't believe in reason and argument. who don't believe in truth, who believe that just everything is a different point of view, that their point of view happens to be right and moral and good, and anyone who disagrees with them is a very bad person. And if you can't make them shift, you can attack them, kill them, and murder them. You can convince these people that Elon Musk is a Nazi. I mean, it's the most extraordinary thing that is occurring in this world. Convince them that he's a Nazi, and they'll go out and destroy people who are happily driving along in a Tesla car. They'll attack the car. So it's in a very bad way, and it's very precarious. There's only one bright light in the world at the moment, and that is that we can resurrect democracy and that we can vote people that will provide some leadership to reverse it. If we don't do that, Western civilization, I fear, is lost. And the bright light is Donald Trump. And on all the issues that we're discussing, people have voted, and he's implementing the policies. They have a law now that a woman is a woman and a man is a man. Full stop. You can't put on your passport anything else. And over and over and over, Trump and his team, amazing team, are attempting the reversal for the United States of America. If they succeed, there's hope for the world.
I was struck, just as a side note, before I come to your good self, Bruce, the new CEO of NPR. NPR is actually, as you guys will know, but for some viewers and listeners, is actually a really large North American media outlet. She has said, and quote, "Our reverence for the truth might be a distraction, getting in the way of finding common ground and getting things done." Our reverence for truth might be getting in the way of finding common ground. And just for me, when you spoke, Rodney, it just echoed that all of a sudden truth doesn't really need to exist for these guys.
Lesser importance.
Lesser importance than common ground, which of course they'll define. So Bruce, is there anything optimistic we can take from, granted I went through that exceptionally fast, but again, 24, almost 25% of Kiwis think effectively violence or hostile action's okay. 67% of us are deeply skeptical about anyone in leadership. What's your take? What can we do?
I'm not sure that I can improve very much on what Rodney said, but I did find interesting the quote that you gave about reverence. And I noticed that Chloe Swarbrick also talked about her colleagues being treated irreverently. Now, what does she mean by irreverence and reverence? I've always thought that reverence was a religious term, and it was about respect for God, that one was holy, who is holy and reverent. And it's interesting that the term is being used by both of those people in a kind of reverse, that somehow or other their particular world is due reverence, when in fact truth is undermined at the same time. And Rodney's just so right. The loss of truth is really the main problem. And that if you've got no truth, you can't have any trust. Trust only lives in a world where there is truth. And it's been going on now. I've lived long enough to see it actually happening. You were talking about Os Guinness a little while ago. He mentioned, he has an image. He talks about what's going on in the West. He says we're a cut flower society. In other words, we're living off the past and we're dying. And one of the reasons we're dying is we no longer believe in truth. One of the reasons, when I was a lad, we trusted policemen, would you believe? We didn't think about not trust. We even trusted politicians. Even
Good God, that must have been a long time ago.
Well, it was a long time ago. And we trusted the government generally. We thought, and I think probably they were trying to do the right thing by the world rather than by the constituents, and that there was still an idealism around. Now, of course, things have changed, and there are obvious factors I think that have contributed to the loss of trust. There's things that we can identify quite easily. Other than that, although they're consequential to the loss of truth, there are things that sometimes brought up like family breakdown, the widening gap between the rich and the poor, I suppose. And the onslaught of social media, international tensions and the rising cost of living, all of these contribute to a tension and a loss of trust. But when in most human relationships, when I'm going back to when I was talking about being a young man, we still tend to trust in most human relationships. We tended to trust people, and that tended to overcome suspicion. Most people still believed in God. Now, I know that might be seen as a simplistic thing to say, but nevertheless, if a society does not have a clear understanding of God, then their understanding and any whatever belief they have can only be vague and imprecise, and it's not going to lead to confidence. And belief in God also helps to make people responsible. I think it makes us more honest. There used to be a prevailing concept, I think it was Burkean originally. He talked about what they say, oh yeah, better to have a policeman in your head than in every street corner. And one of the consequences of belief in truth, one is responsible, and you do tend to have a policeman in your head rather than every street corner. Now, and we also used to have a concept we were taught and took for granted. We used to call it self-respect, which was a moral concept of self-control, how we should live and control our actions and so on. That's been replaced not by a moral concept, but by a psychological concept of self-esteem, which is about feeling good about yourself. So you don't need truth to feel good about yourself, because you just create your own kind of truth to feel good about yourself. And that leads to also, it undermines the possibility of trust. And so trust depends on as many people as possible having a common social ethic. And that common social ethic, which depends on our understanding of our traditions, the things we loved, and knowing who God is, and consequently knowing who we are, brings about trust. And without that, trust must disappear from the culture. It just goes.
And that's what we're seeing. I mean, these stats are worrying. I'd point out with your policemen on every street corner, have you noticed as we've moved away from commonalities, and be it faith or values, that we need more and more laws and regulations now in everyday life? Alfred, is there any positive news? Is there any way we can turn this round again? Those figures aren't particularly endearing. You might have insights again of how we've got here along with Bruce and Rodney, but is there any hope? Is there anything positive we can add?
Yeah, I think one of the things that it's like the deprivation index that you have in Parliament, right? It's a governmental tool that measures, and like this barometer around trust as an index, it's measuring the levels of trust. Now, it's important because it highlights the awareness, but you can't use the same line of inquiry to change the situation. Because then what you do is that you're not using what they call a strength-based approach. You still don't deny the fact that this is here, but you have to go back to ask other things. What is good about our country that we can hold on to? And how do we allow the goodness, whether it's in the past or in the present, to then go back to then upholding those values, which is what Bruce and also Rodney has been talking about. You're right. They're values that stood the test of time. They're who we are. And I think that you started to realize that a lot of times as you started to grow up, it was no longer about how you think, what are you thinking? It was all about how you're feeling. And once you start to do that, everything's sort of like become emotive, right? And we don't use our cognitive ability to reason, to rationale, but instead it's all about, what's the emotion now? How am I feeling about things? Nothing wrong with emotions. But if that's all we keep talking about, right, we fail to engage with the whole cognitive process of thinking things through. Rationale, those things become important. And then we become, anxious, we become fearful, about lots of things. And, it's not surprising that 25% of people, see that violence is acceptable. You have to remember that we've desensitized ourselves in so many different ways. And I remember, when we were in the Justice Electoral Select Committee, and one of the things that we had is that we had the chief censor come before us, in your annual reports. I asked them this question: what's the greatest concern that you have? He said it's the social media game called Grand Theft Auto. And I said, why do you have, where does the concern come from? He said, because basically on this game, you can learn to carjack at gunpoint, you can steal, you can murder, you can gang rape, you can do all of these things that you thought. And he said, and even though there's an R18 tag on it, he said, we know that children as young as 8 and 10 are playing this game. And by the way, it's the #1 game in the world. So not only are we desensitizing, but we're replacing values, and we're normalizing these behaviors. The second thing, just about the media, I remember that when I was a minister, I got in trouble. I know it's hard to believe, but I did. And I made a comment.
Breaking news.
I made a comment, Rodney, and I commented about John Campbell. I said that he's manufacturing crisis. And I said, and I justified that because when he interviewed a young woman, as a young mother, that she was in a motel, and I had one of my ministerial warrants was Associate Minister for Housing, looking after transition housing and so forth. And he said, and he interviewed this young mother, 2 young kids. How did you get here? She said, I got kicked out of home. Now, what do you think would have been the next question you should have asked? Why did you get kicked out of home? That's not what he asked. You know what he said? Are the government looking after you? How are your children? When have they promised to get you into a proper home and so forth? Now, what's happening there? The reality is, the media are not interested in reporting the truth, as the news. They're interested in telling you what the news should be and what you should be looking for. And so that's when I made this comment. It's like the media now are manufacturing crisis. They're not trying to understand what the truth is. And if you follow the line of inquiry to ask why and how, then you could have got to the point. So I got one of my staff to go down and interview this young woman. And you know the reasons why she was there? She was staying with her parents. Her boyfriend was a meth addict, was beating her and the kids up. The parents said to her, leave the kids with us if you're going to be like this. And if you want to hang out with your boyfriend, go and do that. She said, no, get stuffed, grabbed the 2 kids and went. Now, how are you going to help someone in that situation if all you're going to do, and it's not about being judgmental. Sometimes there's a bit of tough love to help someone find the end. So right back there and then, I'm not surprised that the levels of trust are so low at the moment within New Zealand. And the last thing to say is this. On this report, it has started accelerating in 2022, and we know why, because of COVID. We know why, because do you remember, right from the podium, the platform, we were told that there's only one single source of truth. And already the suspicion came out. The COVID election, the 2020 election was a COVID election out of fear. Labor went in, 65 MPs, under MMP, never happened before, right? Why? Because people were afraid, wanted to trust in the government, they were let down. And do you remember that in 2022, there was a court case in which the police men and the defence men and women who took the government to court and they won. The mandate to vaccine was overturned by the court. And both the Defence Force and the police had to be, those who refused to be mandated to be vaccinated, they had to be re-employed again. But I can tell you, having talked to some of them, their level of trust in government just plummeted. And that's a good example, a good barometer. If you're talking about people who are working for the government, what do you think it's going to be like out in the community? There is hope. I think part of the hope is what we are wanting to talk about here, right? Things that we can do, in our communities, in our churches, the messages that we need to give, giving people who are in places of influence the confidence to say, speak the truth. Don't be afraid. You're on the right side.
And that you've got many others with you. Actually, you're not alone. I think that's one of the really core messages. And speaking of not being alone, to literally the hundreds of people commenting, I'm loving it, but I've lost control. There are too many of them, but they are fantastic. And
Simon,
we'll make sure Rodney, jump on in.
There is a great outcome of this, because just like you opened at the start with that comment that humanism has failed, so too has government. And of course, this whole thing has been to make government, if you like, our God, and who we look to look after us in dark times. And it has failed us, and we don't trust it because it's a false God. And there may be many more like me, I hope, who realize that humanism is wrong and that God is real and God is true. And if we lose our faith in these fake institutions, maybe we can find our way back as a people to a faith in God and discover meaning and purpose and truth, and discover faith in our families, because we can no longer look to government to look after us. So there may be a glimmer on the horizon as we increasingly know we have to look to ourselves, look to our families, and look to what we can believe in order to find the truth.
Well, I've always been struck by seeing someone else mention Edmund Burke earlier, talking about the family as that little platoon. And, it's not the state, it's not global elites, it's the family. And that's one of the areas, of course, that they attack relentlessly. So just one last really quick question. We can start with you, Rodney. It is just particularly around the media. When we observe what we've seen today with the Greens, they're gaslighting, they're full of excuses, and the way that the media has chosen to and to not report this, is there really any surprise of how New Zealanders are reacting to mainstream media as compared to obviously what Family First is doing, Platform, RCR, and other alternate media?
None whatsoever, and they will die. And Bob McCoskey with Family First has done a fantastic job building a platform, a trusted platform. There's new initiatives with RCR and the platform. I think it's going to be wonderful. I think we are going to see better news. I rely on X. I actually go now to the media for a laugh.
What about yourself, Alfred? As you take a laugh, as you say, when you observe how media's reported or not reported in recent days, are they just, sorry to use an aggressive analogy, but are they just shooting themselves in the foot repeatedly?
Yeah, I think their days are over. I think they're numbered. They already have been. This has started 2 years ago. Remember when we talked about the funding, and the height of it was when under Jacinda Ardern's government, they were almost fully funding the media. Now that's not sustainable, and it all started to fall apart, and it already has. And people have gone, and their vulnerabilities, I mean, they were almost a law unto themselves, and all of a sudden now it's broken them. And I think, hopefully for the good. We don't wish ill will on anyone, but there are always consequences for your words and for your actions. And if you're not about to speak the truth in the public domain, so as politicians have been held to account, so too the media, and it's their time. So good news with RCR, good news with Family First, the platform. Duncan Garner's now come out, and a number of others. I think the trend now is shifting, and it's great.
Bruce, you've been around just a little bit longer than all of us, either singly or combined. No, sorry, tongue in cheek. I mean, do you see new signs of hope?
After listening to Rodney and Alfred, yeah, I think I do. I think this loss of trust is actually a good thing, because it's a loss of trust in the false gods that have been trying to deliver us from evil, and of course, which of course have failed. And so we're going to have to fall back on those institutions which delivered trust and from which we learned to trust in the past. And the two obvious things are two things that have been created by God that are under duress, and they're nationhood and family.
Mm.
And family is essential to building up and understanding what nature trust. If you don't learn to trust as a child, trust is very difficult. But if you learn to trust as a child, trust is much easier as an adult. And I think once those false gods have seen to be what they are, false gods, we may move on. And to go back to a term that Osguinness used, if I can remember it properly, was that one of the historical focuses was falling away and, can you recall it, Simon? Falling away and...
He's written a lot and said a lot, so I'm on the spot.
It was a lovely little pairing. what happened to the Jews, they would
we'd have to take that on notice and look it up.
Captivity and liberation. It wasn't liberation.
Could be creativity, because Jonathan Lord Sachs actually spoke about that.
I can't remember, which is terrible.
That's all right. It's getting late. It's getting late at night. Hey, well, thinking of things trusted, and particularly for our viewers tonight, you know that Family First runs the Forum on the Family. We have an amazing array of guests coming. As I say, you can see on screen now from the 28th to the 29th of August. I just want to introduce to you 2 short videos of 2 of our wonderful trusted speakers.
Hi, I'm Dr. Miriam Grossman. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'd written a book called Lost in Trans Nation, a child psychiatrist guide out of the madness. And I wrote the book after having seen in my private practice hundreds of families dealing with the issue of having a gender-confused child or young adult and helping them to navigate that issue. So I discuss this and many other things in my book, and I will be talking about many of those things when I see you again in August.
Hi, I'm Dawn Hawkins from NCOSE, or the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, based in the U.S. I'm looking forward to being with you at the Family Forum 2025 this August, where we'll talk about the connections between all forms of sexual abuse and exploitation, how they overlap, how they fuel one another, and most importantly, how we can stop these harms. We'll talk about the root issue of pornography and demand, how we have to go after the sex buyers if we want to stop sexual harm in the sex industry. We'll also talk about protecting children online and some really incredible momentum happening all around the globe. And I'm looking forward especially to brainstorming on solutions together.
So those are just 2 of, so I quickly looked down to make sure I've unmuted myself. My common error to mute myself, which is a great grace to my family and the community, but not so good for hosting live shows. Look, those are just 2 of a fabulous lineup, and I'm looking forward to, as will Bob, of introducing more of these to you. As you can see, the 28th to 29th of August, tickets will be on sale soon, but mark your diaries. You will literally be joining hundreds and hundreds of like-minded Kiwis, including, I hope, most if not all the panelists that you've come to know and love here on Straight Talk. So guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. I do have more topics, but I'm a stickler for time, even though I've already gone 4 minutes over. Bob, if you're listening in, and I am sure you are with that one eye, all of us here on the panel, I'm sure all the listeners and viewers are sending their best wishes and probably very much looking forward now to having you back. Rodney, Bruce, and Alfred, just so grateful for your time and joining us here with your thoughts and perspectives. Look forward to having you all back here another time on Straight Talk. And as for now, to all of you, thanks for watching. Yeah.